Today, Donald Trump says, I'm winning a war by a lot. His FBI director says, I don't have a drinking problem. And another Trump cabinet secretary who denies having a drinking problem on the job was fired today or quit. What's the difference? Donald Trump's guiding principle in assembling his cabinet and staffing the government was loyalty to Donald Trump, followed by maximum outrage. Donald Trump obviously set out to pick people who had no significant professional standing in their fields or weren't even in the fields that they would be given jurisdiction over in the federal government. And the more the choice of those people could infuriate Democrats, the better. That's what got us Kashyap Pramod Patel as the most unqualified, indeed, the only truly unqualified FBI director in history. It was only in Kashyap P. Patel's lawsuit filed today against The Atlantic and reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick that I, for one, learned, quote, plaintiff Kashyap P. Patel is an individual who is a resident and citizen of Nevada. He's the first FBI director in history who lives in Nevada, in Las Vegas. He's also the first FBI director in history that we know of to have a girlfriend. And it isn't that we know of, okay, because all the rest of them were married. He's the only FBI director in history to have a girlfriend, and the girlfriend doesn't live in Washington, D.C. or Las Vegas, which means that Kashyap Patel uses an awful lot of federal government jet fuel on his government-funded plane for rendezvous with his girlfriend. Kashyap Patel filed a frivolous lawsuit today against The Atlantic, which he will surely drop as soon as he has to respond to real discovery subpoenas that The Atlantic is now legally empowered to bury him in, demanding via subpoena power internal FBI communications, including emails and text messages, to prove what The Atlantic reported under the headline, "The FBI director is MIA." Kashyap Patel's lawsuit now opens him to discovery subpoenas from The Atlantic to prove everything that Kashyap Patel now insists is false and defamatory. Now, I'm about to read to you directly from Kashyap Patel's lawsuit a list of items from The Atlantic article that Kashyap Patel insists are not true. And remember, as I read this list, Kashyap Patel did not promise anyone that he would stop drinking in order to be confirmed by the Senate. That was Pete Hegseth, who had to publicly promise to stop drinking in order to be confirmed by the Republican Senate to become the Secretary of Defense for what was then a peacetime military. Kashyap Patel's lawsuit insists that all of the following items are not true. A, that Director Patel is known to drink to the point of obvious intoxication in many cases at the private club Ned's in Washington, D.C., while in the presence of White House and other administration staff. B, that Director Patel is also known to drink to excess at the Poodle Room in Las Vegas, where he frequently spends parts of his weekends. C, that early in his tenure, meetings and briefings had to be rescheduled for later in the day as a result of his alcohol-fueled nights. D, that on multiple occasions in the past year, members of his security detail had difficulty waking Patel because he was seemingly intoxicated, according to information supplied to Justice Department and White House officials. E, that a request for breaching equipment normally used by SWAT and hostage rescue teams to quickly gain entry into buildings was made last year because Patel had been unreachable behind locked doors. H, that on April 10th, 2026, Director Patel panicked, frantically calling aides and allies to announce that he had been fired by the White House and that his behavior was a freakout. J, that Director Patel's drinking has been a recurring source of concern across the government. On page 4 of Kashyap Patel's lawsuit, in one line, he completely undermines his own case, saying, numerous Atlantic pieces over the past 2 years have characterized Director Patel as unqualified, dangerous, corrupt, or mentally unstable. That means that The Atlantic did not hurt Kashyap Patel's reputation with its latest reporting, if for 2 full years The Atlantic has been reporting Director Patel as unqualified, dangerous, corrupt, or mentally unstable. And oh, by the way, why didn't you sue them for calling you mentally unstable? That actually sounds worse than being drunk in Vegas every weekend. As soon as discovery gets underway in this lawsuit, if a judge allows this case to actually get that far, Kashyap Patel will very quickly drop that case.
I know the best people. I know the best managers. I know the best deal makers. I know people that will make us so strong. I know guys that are so good.
The longest running cabinet secretary in history was the first woman member of the cabinet, Frances Perkins, the pioneering social worker in New York who served in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration when he was governor of New York and then became his Secretary of Labor for every day of his presidency, which ended in his death in the 13th year of his presidency after winning re-election to a 4th term. Donald Trump's Labor Secretary had a remarkably long run for someone who appears to be completely out of control in the job while inviting relatives into the workplace. Former Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer was scheduled to be interviewed by the Labor Department's Inspector General in an investigation of possible serious misconduct in her role as Secretary of Labor. The White House announced that she resigned today, which just might be true because it will save her having to submit to an interview with the Inspector General. In a story titled "Labor Department Investigates Texts Among Secretary's Family and Staff," the New York Times reported Ms. Chavez DeRemer's husband exchanged text messages with young female staff members, as did her father. Some of the young women were instructed by Ms. Chavez DeRemer and the former deputy chief of staff to pay attention to the men. According to people familiar with the investigation, the text messages have been reviewed by the New York Times. The New York Times also reports that the secretary's husband, quote, was barred from the department headquarters this year after several women told the Inspector General's investigators that he was making unwanted advances at them. One of the women filed a report with Washington's Metropolitan Police Department, which opened a sexual assault investigation. The department and federal prosecutor's office later said they would not bring charges in the matter. The original complaint to the Inspector General accused Ms. Chavez DeRemer and her aides of drinking on the job and keeping a stash of liquor at the office, according to the New York Post, which first reported the complaint in January. The New York Times also, quote, Mr. Chavez has not been accused of wrongdoing, and a lawyer for the secretary's husband has denied the allegations against him. And so, 3 of Donald Trump's best people, 3 of Donald Trump's cabinet members, who all happen to be women, are gone. His Secretary of Homeland Security, his Attorney General, and now his Secretary of Labor. But Robert Kennedy Jr. is still there. And no one in the Trump cabinet or anywhere in the Trump government in their drunkest moment has ever said anything as vicious, as racist, and as purely evil as what Robert Kennedy Jr. was exposed, having said last week in a House Ways and Means Committee hearing. It is the single most racist thing spoken during our lifetimes by anyone in this country. Congresswoman Terry Sewell found a statement that Robert Kennedy Jr. made 2 years ago when he was a presidential candidate that most of us had no idea he'd ever said, and that, of course, he immediately lied about and denied that he ever said that. The statement proves that Robert Kennedy Jr. is obviously a deep and reflexive and casual racist. And so it might have seemed especially effortless for him to call a black woman a liar during his testimony, because that's in effect what he did. Congresswoman Sewell read Robert Kennedy Jr.'s words to him from a podcast that was released on June 30th, 2024, and Robert Kennedy Jr. simply denied saying those words. We then obtained the tape of what Robert Kennedy Jr. said, and we proved last week that he was lying to Congress when he accused Congresswoman Sewell of lying. What Congresswoman Sewell accurately quoted Robert Kennedy Jr. as saying was that every black kid, that was his phrase, every black kid needs to be reparented. That Nazi-sounding word, reparented, meant that Robert Kennedy Jr. was promising that if elected president, he would remove every black kid from their homes, rip every black kid from the arms of that kid's mother or father, and bring them to some kind of federal institution that he would create so that those black kids could be reparented. That was his word. And so there you have the ravings of a racist madman, a racist, Nazi-minded madman, falling on the deaf ears of the Washington press corps because the madness of Donald Trump and the madness of Donald Trump's war and the madness of Donald Trump's best people working for him, including an FBI director accused of drinking too much and a cabinet secretary being fired or quit so she can avoid an investigation of her conduct. But I have a bit more to say about the virulent racism of Robert Kennedy Jr. tonight, and you'll hear what his cousin, the daughter of President Kennedy, Caroline Kennedy, had to say about Robert Kennedy Jr. when she publicly begged Republicans in the United States Senate not to confirm her cousin and unleash him on the children of America as the single most destructive human force ever deliberately aimed at the public health of children in America who were saved during Robert Kennedy Jr.'s childhood from the scourge of polio by the stunning success of the polio vaccine, a success that Robert Kennedy Jr. now lies about and denies. The cabinet secretary, who did have to promise to stop drinking to be confirmed by the Republican Senate, is the cabinet member who Donald Trump will probably be blaming the most at some point in the future for Donald Trump's war in Iran. Marco Rubio, James David Vance, and others will spend the rest of their lives insisting that they privately advised Donald Trump not to launch a war with Iran. But Pete Hegseth will have a more difficult time with history for a couple of reasons. The first being that when you illegally try to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War and then illegally call yourself the Secretary of War, you are by definition a warmonger. The other problem for Pete Hegseth is, of course, that there's no evidence Donald Trump would, under any circumstances, ever solicit or listen to a word of advice from him about anything. And it also seems apparent that Donald Trump is running this war himself, mostly by tweet. At 2:11 p.m. today, Donald Trump announced, "I'm winning a war by a lot. Things are going very well." That is Donald Trump's latest assessment of his war. I'm winning a war. But as we know, that assessment is subject to change at any moment and is always false. It was only yesterday that Donald Trump once again publicly threatened to commit war crimes in Iran, which is in and of itself a war crime, the public threatening of war crimes. Donald Trump said, "We're offering a very fair and responsible deal, and I hope they take it, because if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. No more Mr. Nice Guy, exclamation point. It will be my honor to do what has to be done." Couple things. It will be my honor to commit war crimes is something that the worst American war criminals never said. Lieutenant William J. Calley, who murdered more than 340 Vietnamese villagers at close range, gunpoint execution style, men, women, children, babies, grandparents, never said, "It will be my honor to murder Vietnamese babies." It's only Donald Trump who thinks threatening war crimes and committing war crimes will be my honor. And Donald Trump threatening "no more Mr. Nice Guy" in capital letters with an exclamation point really has no meaning for a person who has not spent one day of his life as a nice guy. Donald Trump has gone from saying 2 weeks ago there was no need to negotiate anything with Iran because he had already won his war, to now publicly and repeatedly sending his completely inexperienced negotiators who have never negotiated with Iran to come up with a peace deal. And today, at 1:35 p.m., Donald Trump made a simple promise about that deal. The deal that we are making with Iran will be far better the JCPOA, commonly referred to as the Iran nuclear deal. The Iran nuclear deal was negotiated by President Barack Obama through his State Department, beginning with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and concluded successfully by Secretary of State John Kerry. Donald Trump has never said one true thing about that deal, which was the single most important diplomatic achievement of our lifetimes, and there isn't a close second. The United States negotiating partners in the deal were China, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany, an unprecedented alliance brought together by President Obama. Donald Trump has no negotiating partners with Iran, not one. And Donald Trump told this lie about the deal that John Kerry negotiated. It was a guaranteed road to a nuclear weapon, which will not and cannot happen with the deal we're working on. The deal that Donald Trump ripped up in the first year of his presidency, the deal John Kerry negotiated, the deal President Obama agreed to, the deal Iran agreed to, says on page 3, Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. Iran put that in writing and signed that 11 years ago. And one of the first things Donald Trump did as president was to rip that up. And now he is begging Iran to agree to exactly those words once again. Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. President Obama did not threaten to commit war crimes in Iran to achieve that agreement. President Obama sent the most experienced and expert negotiating team ever sent on a diplomatic mission for the United States of America. The negotiating team included Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, a nuclear physicist, and other nuclear experts. There is not a single nuclear expert in Donald Trump's negotiating team. Just a couple of real estate guys. Donald Trump's negotiating team includes his son-in-law, a real estate operator, and J.D. Vance. And they are up against this. At 5:12 p.m. today, the Speaker of the Iranian parliament tweeted, quote, Trump, by imposing a siege and violating the ceasefire, seeks to turn this negotiating table in his own imagination into a table of surrender or to justify renewed warmongering. We do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats. And in the past 2 weeks, we have prepared to reveal new cards on the battlefield. The top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Adam Smith, will join us after this break. Today, Donald Trump wrote, I'm winning a war by a lot. Things are going very well. Let's check in with Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State. He's the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Smith, you are as well positioned as anyone in the Congress to know what's happening in this war with your jurisdiction over the Defense Department. Do you agree with Donald Trump's statement that he's winning a war, things are going very well?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the statement's so nonspecific as to be meaningless. I'm winning a war by a lot. I'm sorry, Mr. President, it's not a baseball game. You can't really keep score in that way. And clearly, we have not achieved the objectives that we wanted to achieve, and we've taken a huge step back in one area that wasn't a problem before he started the war. Iran has not given up their nuclear program. They've not given up their ballistic missile program. They've not given up their support for terrorist groups. And now they are holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, which they weren't before. And there's no plausible path forward for us to change any of those things right now. Yes, we have blown up a lot of missiles. We've blown up a lot of missile launchers. But every military expert that I talked to over the course of the last 15 years said that was the problem. You can blow up a lot of things and do a lot of damage to Iran without achieving any meaningfully strategic objective, which is why starting the war was such a bad idea. And that doesn't even factor in the costs of this war. There are 13 service members killed, hundreds more wounded, thousands of civilians killed. The global economy is in crisis because of this war. Gas prices up by over $1, fertilizer hard to come by. So the costs are high, and we have not yet realized the benefits that would make this meaningful. So no, even with his rather awkward phrasing, I don't agree that we are winning this war at this moment.
He's also promised a better deal than the one John Kerry negotiated for President Obama. Does that seem possible?
It seems highly unlikely at this moment. Now, part of the problem here is we don't know exactly what's going on. I mean, two big reasons for that. One, you outlined brilliantly with Rachel, and I can't do better than the analogies you used. That President Trump, you can't believe a thing he says. So it's hard to track what's going on because he goes in radically different directions, and you know that he's just making it up at least 75% of the time. And then in Iran, and this is a crucial part, who are we negotiating with? Who's running Iran? It's hard to tell. The reporting seems to suggest that the hardline IRGC has consolidated their power, but you do still have a president and members of parliament who are perhaps a little bit more willing to cut a deal. But every time you have any hope of getting close to that, President Trump undercuts it by basically doing a juvenile victory dance that undermines the credibility of anybody, if there is anyone in Iran, trying to get to a reasonable place, and just boosts the hardliners. When you threaten the war crimes that you describe, when you threaten the erasure of a civilization, that's going to boost the hardliners who say we have to stand up to this guy. So not only is what Trump is saying, impossible to believe just because he makes so much of it up, it's undermining our ability to get any kind of deal at this point.
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, you'll hear from Caroline Kennedy about her cousin Robert Kennedy Jr., who said that every black kid in America needs to be reparented with different parents. Robert Kennedy Jr. attacked every black kid in America and their parents, and now he denies saying what you will hear him say on tape. Next. On Thursday of last week, we saw how casually Robert Kennedy Jr. spews deeply racist poison. The revelation came in a House Ways and Means Committee hearing when Congressman Terry Sewell quoted to Robert Kennedy Jr. something he had said on a podcast 2 years earlier when he was running for president. We showed you this video last week, but it's worth watching again, especially the casual ease with which Robert Kennedy Jr. calls Congresswoman Sewell, in effect, a liar. Congresswoman Sewell quotes him, reads his quote, and then Robert Kennedy Jr. says that he didn't say that. And in that moment, Robert Kennedy Jr. is lying to a congressional committee, and lying to Congress is a crime. And watch him in the full flush of what he must believe to be the divine right of Kennedys to lie to Congress. That is not something that any Kennedy who served in Congress would do. John F. Kennedy went to the presidency from the United States Senate, where he would never lie in a Senate hearing. Senator Ted Kennedy had faults and weaknesses, but no one ever accused him of lying in a Senate committee hearing. And when you watch Robert Kennedy Jr. lie, you can only wonder if it's extra easy for him to lie because he's lying about his racism to a black woman. Watch the agony and rage he has at this woman for asking him about what he said. He is talking down to a black woman from his deeply racist, perverted sense of superiority.
In a 2024 podcast interview, you suggested that black children on ADHD medication should be reparented. You said every black kid is now just standardly put on Adderall, SSRI, benzos, which are known to induce violence, and that those children are going to have to go somewhere to get reparented. There is a lot to unpack in that comment. I know that you've already answered several of the questions I was going to ask, and so I'm just going to rephrase them. Mr. Secretary, you've already admitted that you are not board-certified physician, and you've already admitted that you did not go to medical school. Have you ever reparented, or parented, I should say, a black child?
I don't even know what that phrase means, and I doubt that I said it.
A yes or no answer.
I doubt that I said that phrase. No,
absolutely
I'm not going to answer something that I didn't say.
You absolutely said it.
And here is that racist madman absolutely saying it.
Every black kid is now just standard put on Adderall, SSRIs, benzos, which are known to induce violence. And those kids are going to have a chance to go somewhere and get reparented.
Every black kid needs to go somewhere and be reparented. Every black kid. He lied about it again the next day in another hearing, and this time it was another black woman asking him about it. Congresswoman Summer Lee asked Robert Kennedy Jr. why he denied the day before, saying that every black kid should be reparented, and he simply did not answer the question. And his failure to retract his lie from the day before when given that chance is, in effect, a second lie to Congress. Most cabinet positions are not science-based. An attorney general does not have to know any science. A Treasury secretary doesn't have to know any science. But the Secretary of Health and Human Services is all about science. That is what that department does. And science includes precise measurement of everything, precise quantification, and precise language. And so in science, when we say every, we mean 100%. In science, when we say every, we don't mean most. In science, when we say every, we don't mean some. In science, when we say every, we don't mean a few, we don't mean a couple. And when Robert Kennedy Jr. said every black kid, every one of them, 100% of the black children of America, very much including the two who we saw grow up in the White House, need to be removed from their parents because their parents are incapable of parenting them, and they need to be reparented. And Robert Kennedy Jr. was exposed saying that at the same time he was exposed in a new book revealing what he wrote in his own diary about stopping his car with his kids in the car so that he could pick up a roadkill raccoon so he could cut off the penis of that raccoon and take it home to study it later. And that's not the sickest thing about Robert Kennedy Jr. But that's the parent who's accusing every black parent in America of failing to the point where their children need to be taken away from them. He was still running for president when he said that on June 30th, 2024, and he was saying that as president, that's what he would do. He would use what he presumed to be his dictatorial powers to take kids away, take every black kid away from their parents and have them go somewhere. That was his phrase, go somewhere, and get reparented. The federal government would create the somewhere. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s federal government would build reparenting centers along with the ICE detention centers that Donald Trump wants to build that Robert Kennedy Jr. so fully supports. Robert Kennedy Jr. has used his name every day of his life as his primary currency. He never would have gotten a job in the Manhattan District Attorney's office if the Manhattan DA hadn't been a friend of his father's. And while he had that job, he was a heroin addict who got arrested for felony heroin possession. He was found guilty but got no jail time because of his Kennedy privilege. Caroline Kennedy warned every Republican senator about her cousin. Caroline Kennedy publicly opposed Robert Kennedy Jr.'s Senate confirmation. She put her opposition in writing to every member of the Senate committee, and she issued a public video message addressed to all senators. She told them that she's never wanted to speak out about family members, but there was too much at stake in putting her cousin in charge of Health and Human Services. What she told the senators should have left them completely unsurprised when they learned last week about him cutting off raccoon penises with his kids watching from the car, because Caroline Kennedy said he's been torturing animals since he was a kid. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s brother, David Kennedy, died of a drug overdose at age 28. And in her video statement, Caroline Kennedy blamed Robert Kennedy Jr. for leading his little brother to his death by drugs. And she did something she's never done before. She spoke for her father, President Kennedy, about what he would think now, what he would think about Robert Kennedy Jr. And she spoke for her uncle, Robert Kennedy, and she spoke for her uncle, Ted Kennedy, about what they would think about Robert Kennedy Jr. And she said that President Kennedy and the Kennedy senators, the Kennedy brothers, would be disgusted.
I've never wanted to speak publicly about my family members and their challenges. We are a close generation of 28 cousins who have been through a lot together. We know how hard it's been, and we are always there for each other. But now that Bobby has been nominated by President Trump to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, a position that would put him in charge of the health of the American people, I feel an obligation to speak out. Overseeing the FDA, the NIH, the CDC, and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, agencies that are charged with protecting the most vulnerable among us, is an enormous responsibility and one that Bobby is unqualified to fill. He lacks any relevant government, financial, management, or medical experience. His views on vaccines are dangerous and willfully misinformed. These facts alone should be disqualifying. But he has personal qualities related to this job, which for me pose even greater concern. I've known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together. It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator. He's always been charismatic, able to attract others through the strength of his personality, his willingness to take risks, and break the rules. I watch his younger brothers and cousins follow him down the path of drug addiction. His basement, his garage, his dorm room were always the center of the action, where drugs were available, and he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed to his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence. That was a long time ago, and people can change. Through his own strength and the many second chances he was given by people who felt sorry for the boy who lost his father, Bobby was able to pull himself out of illness and disease. I admire the discipline that took and the continuing commitment it requires. But siblings and cousins who Bobby encouraged down the path of substance abuse suffered addiction, illness, and death, while Bobby has gone on to misrepresent, lie, and cheat his way through life. We are a close family, and none of that is easy to say. It also wasn't easy to remain silent last year when Bobby expropriated my father's image and distorted President Kennedy's legacy to advance his own failed presidential campaign, and then groveled to Donald Trump for a job. Bobby continues to grandstand off my father's assassination and that of his own father. It's incomprehensible to me that someone who is willing to exploit their own painful family tragedies for publicity would be put in charge of America's life and death situations. Unlike Bobby, I try not to speak for my father, but I am certain that he and my Uncle Bobby, who gave their lives in public service to our country, and my Uncle Teddy, who devoted his long Senate career to the cause of improving health care, would be disgusted.
Republican senators were warned, and those cowards gave us Robert Kennedy Jr. Coming up, thanks to federal judge Richard Eaton, Donald Trump is now being forced to begin refunding his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs. That's next with Neil Katyal, who won the case against the Trump tariffs in the United States Supreme Court. Thanks to an order and schedule by Judge Richard Eaton of the Special Court of International Trade, the Trump administration has been forced to design and implement a refund system starting today of the illegal and unconstitutional tariffs that they have collected. The New York Times reports for some U.S. businesses, the highly anticipated refunds could be substantial, offering critical if belated financial relief. Tariffs are taxes on imports, so the president's trade policies have served as a great burden for companies that rely on foreign goods. Many have had to choose whether to absorb the duties, cut other costs, or pass on the expenses to consumers. By Monday morning, those companies could begin submitting documentation to the government to recover what they paid in illegal tariffs. Last week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent continued to tell the Trump lie about who paid the Trump illegal tariffs.
Just to be clear, thanks to the Supreme Court, some of this money is going back to China. So is that going to affect the U.S. economy? I don't know.
Joining us now is Neil Katyal, former acting U.S. Solicitor General, who won the Trump tariff case in the United States Supreme Court. Neil, how much of this money is going back to China?
Zero, as far as I know. I mean, Lawrence, first of all, good to be with you. And let's remember what this case is about. Small businesses stood up and said what the president was doing with these unilateral exorbitant tariffs was illegal. And the U.S. Supreme Court, including two of the president's own appointees to that court, agreed. And so these refunds are going to small businesses and other businesses that have paid these tariffs. And, you know, it is $166 billion that the federal government illegally collected. And now those refunds are going back. It is the largest refund action in the history of this country. And it can't come a moment too soon because, Lawrence, it's not China. It's people like my clients, small businesses who had to let people go. And, you know, they couldn't buy equipment. They had to forego it. Many of them went bankrupt because of these tariffs. And we won and we're getting the refunds back. But these folks can't get their lives back. There's no ability for small businesses that went out of business to now come back in. And it's a true shame. And it's even more of a shame that the American taxpayers, you want to talk about who's footing the bill, American taxpayers, they're having to pay $900 million every month in interest because of these illegal Trump tariffs. And if the president had just followed the Constitution to begin with, we wouldn't be in this situation.
There are also some big companies on this list getting refunds. Every company I look at here is an American company, Neil. Walmart is going to get a $10 billion refund, and right down to Nike getting $1 billion. But those companies had the strength to move through the tariff phase that they were going to have to go through. But the smaller businesses, those are the people who desperately needed the help, and they needed it fast.
That's exactly right. And, you know, the big companies know how to navigate the refund system. The smaller ones, Lawrence, it's a much harder thing. And so my client, the Liberty Justice Center, has set up and launched Project Terra on their website. And if you're a small business, you can go there and understand exactly what you need to do to file for these refunds. It's not particularly complicated, but obviously if you're a small business and tariff refund actions aren't your normal cup of tea, as they aren't, we're trying to make it easier for folks to do that. But the bottom line here is the president did something gravely illegal. He lost in the Supreme Court 6-3, and now all that money has to be refunded back.
And Judge Eaton, who's an expert in international trade, that's the only thing he considers in court. It's the only thing he has jurisdiction over. He insisted that the government knows how to do this. We've had to refund tariffs before in certain situations, never on this kind of massive scale, but he didn't give them any wiggle room in terms of schedule and when they had to get this done.
That's exactly right. He is an international trade judge. He looked at this and said, look, this seems pretty easy. And fortunately, the government today launched the website for the refund actions, and so they're processing those claims now, and they should be paid right away. I mean, it's been 2 months to the day, Lawrence, since the Supreme Court ruled. They ruled on February 20th, and it's high time for this money to come back, because while some businesses have gone bankrupt and had to fire, others are just teetering at the edge and waiting for this money, and it should get to them right away. There's no excuse.
Another win for the United States Constitution. Neil Katyal, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
The winning lawyer who convinced the United States Supreme Court that Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal and unconstitutional, Neil Katyal, gets tonight's last word.